All right, you may be seated. I could talk probably for the next hour or so about my favorite Kansas City Royals pitchers, but they've been done with this season for quite a while, as you all are aware. And plus, me talking about my Kansas City sports fandom seems to annoy some of you. And to you, I just want to say, too bad. But I could talk about my favorite Royals pitchers for quite some time, and that would probably be annoying to you. And as an act of humility and truth-telling, I should probably just let you know that there was one pitcher back in the day who pitched for the Mariners who was better than any man who ever stood on the mound for my boys in blue back in Kansas City. Now, my favorite pitcher of all time was a guy named Nolan Ryan, and Nolan Ryan was a fearsome competitor. He was the first major league pitcher to throw a fastball over 100 miles an hour. It means that when he was winding up, you better start swinging yesterday if you were going to get around on that pitch before it came by. And Nolan Ryan was just this fearsome competitor who was kind of one of a kind and a legend in his era. And just as his era was coming to the close, one of the greats of Mariner fandom was just about to step into his own, and that was a guy known as the Big Unit, right? Randy Johnson. Randy Johnson fans in the house today? Yeah. You can applaud Randy Johnson. Yeah, he's my second favorite pitcher ever, even though he put it to my Royals many, many times. Early in his career, Randy Johnson struggled for control. He always had heat, but he struggled for control. Just Google or go to YouTube and put in Randy Johnson wild pitches, and you will have a fun afternoon just watching one of the world's best, just completely flinging balls all over the place. But as he was young and struggling, just getting started in the major leagues, this old guy by the name of Nolan Ryan took him aside one day, gave him a little talk and a little bit of coaching, and told him, if you will get your stuff under control, you're going to be one of the best, if not the best, who ever lived. And the man who was telling him that was, at that point, the best who ever lived. Nolan Ryan and Randy Johnson were known for being great pitchers with great fastballs, but they were also known as people who could take care of business off the mound if that's the direction that the game went. And so there were also many YouTube videos that you can check out of those two guys meeting the batters about halfway. Whenever a batter decided that he was going to charge the mound, those two guys would meet him halfway there. And listen, this is just a lesson in physics or trigonometry, okay? If the guy is so tall you have to jump to hit him in the face, you should not try it, okay? That's just what I'm saying. And so fighting Randy Johnson was just foolish, and fighting the old man was foolish because he was just tougher than woodpecker lips. But these two guys developed this reputation for being these incredible fastball pitchers, and they were also guys who had this reputation for having their chest stuck out just a little bit, like, don't try me. But people would try them from time to time, and it was usually because one of them had served up a little bit of chin music. You know what that word means, chin music, when it comes to baseball? It means that those guys who had such pinpoint control were very intentionally bringing it in high and tight, and either intentionally hitting somebody or narrowly missing somebody right around the head and shoulders. And both Randy Johnson and Nolan Ryan were known for protecting the strike zone in such a way that if you crowded it too hard, you're going to get a little bit of chin music. And because those guys could also take care of business if you got hit and decided to come out there and throw a punch at them, pretty soon batters realized we should probably just, cool our jets and step back just a little bit. We've been going to the James Gym for the last 3 weeks, and we're back at the James Gym today. Welcome. But I should probably tell you that today there's a little bit of chin music. I mean, the last few weeks have been admittedly difficult because we've been talking about the business of admitting that our anger just never gets used in ways that glorifies God and helps people. And yet we've defended our right to get angry and reserve the right to be angry in the future. But some of us also decided that we would just surrender that to the Lord and let Him take it so that we could live in peace. You know, last week we learned about this whole business, the good news that you are only going to be judged as harshly as you judge everybody else, right? Good news, bad news, right? You'll only be judged as harshly as you judge everybody else, but you will also be judged as harshly as you judge everybody else. And so there's this law that sets people free. It's just this: give grace to people. Give them permission to be imperfect and still be loved. And then you don't have to worry about how right or wrong they are and how right or wrong you are in comparison. And if they're better than you or worse than you, you can just love them with the love of God and be patient toward them and give them enough room and enough time to grow up in the faith and become mature, where they can treat you and the rest of the folks around them with love. It's all good messages. They're just really hard ones, right? Somebody texted me right after service last week. Man, I wish the gym didn't have to be so hard, but I guess it's better that I get in shape now instead of later. Yeah. Well, the last few weeks have been kind of tough, but today, admittedly, it's chin music. And not from me. It's from James, but I understand that I'm the one who's supposed to deliver the message. So please remember that age-old proverb to not shoot the messenger, okay? Even when he's firing fastballs, okay? We're going to take a look at the scriptures in just a moment. Drew Martin's going to come and read. But understand that as he reads, you're going to hear what I mean when I say today it's chin music. But here's a real risk. You could begin to brace yourself for it. Oh no, it's going to be another hard one. Oh no, here's one that I may not want to have to live by. You could brace yourself. Or you could embrace the word. And this process that we learned about at the very beginning of James Gym 1, which was when these tests come, instead of whining and complaining, we could instead choose to count it all joy, because we know that what God's doing when He tests, when He pushes, when He tries, when He makes the workout tough, is He's trying to make us strong, steadfast, able to take what life brings at us. And in the end, hear this and feel it deep in your heart, to make you whole, complete, lacking nothing. You can either brace yourself or you can embrace what God is doing. Let's hear the word of the Lord.
James 2:14-26. Faith without good deeds is dead. What good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but don't show it by your actions? Can that kind of faith save anyone? Suppose you see a brother or sister who has no food or clothing, and you say, "Goodbye and have a good day. Stay warm and eat well." But then you don't give that person any food or clothing. What good does that do? So you see, faith by itself isn't enough. Unless it produces good deeds, it is dead and useless. Now some may argue, some people have faith, others have good deeds. But I will show you my faith by my good deeds. You say you have faith, for you believe that there is one God. Good for you. Even the demons believe this, and they tremble in terror. How foolish. Can't you see that faith without good deeds is useless? Don't you remember that our ancestor Abraham shown to be right with God by his actions when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see, his faith and his actions worked together. His actions made his faith complete. And so it happened just as the scriptures say. Abraham believed God, and God counted him as righteous because of his faith. He was even called the friend of God. So you see, we are shown to be right with God by what we do, not by faith alone. Rahab the prostitute is another example. She was shown to be right with God by her actions when she hid those messengers and sent them safely away by a different road. Just as the body is dead without breath, so also faith is dead without good works.
Good, Drew. Thank you very much. The book of James. Just so you know, if you're not really enjoying James, if you find him a little bit much to take, you are not the first people in church history. As a matter of fact, the book of James almost didn't make the cut to get into the Bible. It was one of the very late additions because people argued about the content of this book and how appropriate it was for it to be included in light of all the other books in the New Testament, such as the letters of the Apostle Paul. And people argued and argued and argued about whether this book belonged in the New Testament at all. There was a guy about 500 years ago, a man by the name of Martin Luther, when the primary body of Christianity in this world had grown very corrupt at the top and was using its force and its power and its influence to hurt and to destroy and to control people. Luther was a guy who grew a spine and just said, I think we should talk about this. And talking about that was one of the things that got him kicked out of the church, but in so doing, the church found a strand of purity and a place where the Holy Spirit could work once again. And the church of God, which had become so corrupt in this world, once again became an appropriate place for God's Holy Spirit to do his work. One of the things that really kind of woke Luther up to all of that was reading the works of the Apostle Paul. And as he read Romans, he looked at a handful of things and said, seems like even though I'm a priest, I've never heard any of these things before. Why is the church not teaching us this? And when he wrote his letter to the church at Ephesus, a church that he had founded, a church that he had pastored for 3 years. He was a guy who was on the move, but he stuck around with the Ephesians for 3 years because he loved them so and because God called him to stay there instead of naming somebody else to, here, you take over and I'll go reach some other people. God said, no, not for now. You stay with these folks and you help them form in the faith. And when he moved on, he then wrote a letter back to them and taught them this passage, Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, that if you've been around the church much, you've heard it a bunch. It says, for it is by grace you have been saved through faith. And this, meaning faith, is not of yourselves. Even that's the gift of God, not by works, so that nobody can brag about it. You are saved because of grace, because God has decided that even though you're imperfect, he will still love you. And by your faith that says, that's crazy talk, but I like it. And so I'm going to bet my life on God being ridiculously generous and merciful and kind, that I can be imperfect and he'll still love me. It's almost too good to be true. But the best stuff in life is the stuff that's almost too good to be true. And this is some of the very best. And so when Luther encountered Paul's work, it just kind of clicked for him. And it stood in contrast to the control of the church that said you have to keep this rule, and you have to keep this rule, and you have to keep this rule, and you have to keep this rule. Oh, by the way, memorize all the rules. And then keep this rule, and this rule, and this rule. And if you can't keep the rules, you can give us a little bit of money. And, we'll take care of things with God. If you give us enough money, we'll take care of your dead grandma's problems with God. It was a mess. It was an absolute mess. It was horrific. It was a tragedy, and it was corrupt. And when Luther saw the difference between the church and the scriptures, he started writing, and he started preaching, and he started, I believe, with the help of God's Holy Spirit, rebelling in a very appropriate way. He just kept speaking the truth and writing the truth. And so he taught us this idea that salvation, our connection with God in a healthy, holy relationship that lasts forever and ever, that it happens by grace because of what Jesus Christ has done. There was a problem. We have done great wrong, and it puts us at odds with the perfect God, right? But because of what Jesus did, living perfectly, dying selflessly, and being resurrected from the dead, it worked all kinds of justice and mercy and love together into one and made this beautiful balm that God now massages into the cracked and broken lives of every person on the planet who says, I'm a person who needs that. I'm a person who needs a special kind of connection to God because I haven't earned one. I've earned my way out of a good connection with God because I didn't know what to do much of the time. I lived in ignorance. That kind of bit me in the rear end once in a while. When I did know what to do, I often did the wrong thing just because I wanted to. I have squared off against the God. And he has been kind and merciful, forgiving, patient, and loving. I'm going to lean into him, and I'm going to bet the farm. I'm just going to bet my life that imperfect me, trusting God because of what Jesus has done, is going to be enough for God and me to be tight forever. The message of salvation by grace through faith. Can you see why some people read James and went, now wait a darn minute. I mean, we had this great thing going with God, James, where we just admitted that we were screw-ups. We just admitted that we were broken, that we were right out on purpose sinful, but God it didn't act like it didn't matter. He just acted like he loves us even more than that. We were kind of liking the arrangement. And then James comes along and starts talking to us about all these good deeds that we have to do. And a bunch of people started crossing their arms going, I liked the grace message a whole lot more than the good deeds message. And you can see, right, how these two seem to be in conflict. Paul says it is by grace, it is by permission to be imperfect and still be loved, that you are saved through faith, through just trusting God when he says it. And James, who says, hey, start doing the right thing. You can see the conflict, right? Because of that, the book of James almost did not make it into the New Testament. So, what's the deal? How can these two messages be so far apart and still end up in the same Bible? I mean, the Apostle Paul, as I've explained to you from Romans and from Ephesians chapter 2, along with the writer to the Hebrews, that book late in the New Testament, they make this very, very salient case that the work of Jesus Christ is enough for all of us. Nothing needs to be added to the work of Jesus to make it possible for humans to be reconnected with God in a healthy and holy relationship. James comes along and he says, I want to talk to you about how you live. He didn't come along to argue with the Apostle Paul. He didn't come along to make a separate point or a contradictory point. In fact, if you go back and you read that passage that Drew read for us, if you read all of the book of James, you'll see that James never said faith isn't enough. He never said faith doesn't count. He never said faith isn't going to work for you. He never said there's a list of deeds that you have to do, certain ones. Let's, make a list of maybe 10 and see that you get squared away on those and you'll be okay with God. James never said that. James never said, what Jesus did was pretty good, but you're going to have to add a little something in there if you're going to expect that the work of Jesus is going to connect you with God in a way that will last. James never said any of those things. But what James did say is there's a way how you can tell if you have saving faith. He never said you got to do this, this, and this. He just said, let me give you a hint, because you will struggle over the course of your lifetime to tell if you have saving faith. There will be times that the enemy of our souls will come and whisper doubts in your ear. There will be times when he comes and accuses you. There will be times when, because of your memory, you have great shame from your past, and you wonder if you have ever really been connected with God in a way that will last and in a way that will save you, a way that will change you in the here and now. And James said, let me help you recognize whether you have saving faith or not. And he said it's like this. You can tell if you have saving faith because you'll live differently than you did before you knew about the grace of God. Before you knew about the grace of God, you just lived in whichever way pleased you and whichever way seemed right at the moment. But once you encountered the message that God loves people enough that they can be imperfect, and he'll love them all the more. When you encounter that kind of love, if it really gripped you, then something will change in your life. Something will change in your values. Something will change in your relationships. Something will change in your behaviors. Put it another way, James is saying faith is never invisible. It always shows up as obedience to God. Faith is never invisible. It always shows up as obedience to God. See, faith does something in us. It connects us with that grace of God in such a way that now there's a whole new set of possibilities for us. Faith produces a wholehearted obedience to God instead of a half-hearted obedience to some made-up rules. I'm going to say that again. I didn't write that in my notes. That's pretty good. Faith produces a wholehearted obedience to God instead of some half-hearted attempt to be kind of obedient to a list of made-up rules. Have you ever experienced the latter of those two things in your life? Yeah. He tells us that faith produces a wholehearted obedience, and he gives us 4 examples, 4 pictures of it to kind of help us get the point. In the first picture, it's found in verses 15 and 16, and he's talking about a poor guy. This is a situation that comes up in your lives on a regular basis, probably every time you go to Walmart. Probably most of the time when you go to the grocery store. Definitely when you head into the Tri-Cities, you'll come across a poor person now and again. You come across them all the time. You just don't have eyes for them until you go to town. And then you see them holding cardboard signs, and it does something in your heart and in your mind. James says, when you see a poor person, it's going to help you understand whether you have saving faith. Because you'll either say, man, it's a crying shame. People going hungry. Man, I feel for that guy. Or you'll do something about it. James just says you can't say, man, I wish the world was different, and call that Christian faith. You got to do something that makes a difference for the poor person. And that is because of saving faith. Your amens are implied, I get it. See, wishing the world was different, that's not faith. Acting on it is. Feeling some compassion that costs you nothing and helps nobody, that isn't faith. It's fake. Second picture he gives us is found in verse 18. And this is the warning pitch. This is the brushback, okay? This is the one where the chin music comes right down the pipe. He enters into this dialogue kind of where he says, wait a minute. You expect me to believe that you actually have faith in God just because you say you do? I mean, you've said all kinds of things in your life that weren't really true. But this one, yeah, of course, I'm just supposed to swallow it whole and say, yeah, sure, true. Just because you say that you believe in God. He goes on to say, demons many times show more faith than human beings because they at least have the good sense to shake in their shoes when they enter into the farce of fake faith that says big words but does nothing that helps anybody. So the demons at least know to be afraid of what might happen because you mock God in that way. I mean, if demons' faith makes more difference in their lives than ours does. Third picture. He takes us back into the Bible's very first book, the book of Genesis, and he goes back to the story of the patriarch in the faith. I mean, the world was a mess, And if you've read the Bible through, you'll see it's a recurring story. God makes people. People think, I know how to run the world. God, at least my part of it, I don't need you. We rebel against him. Life turns to a shambles. And God reaches down into the mess and says, I see one person who seems like they would be willing to work with me. And so he works with them for a little bit. And Abraham was one of those guys. About, a third of the way into the book of Genesis, you see God just reaching down and talking to this guy. And he says, how about this? How about we run a social experiment in which you trust me, and then I will bless your family in such a way, you'll see the relationship between your family and me, and it will be something that, while it's difficult, it also will have these very tremendous rewards to it. And your neighbors will be able to, by watching, see that relationship with me is a good thing. And then maybe your neighbors will want to join the family. And this experiment, he was going to carry on for a very long time with the hope that eventually everyone in the entire world would say, yeah, I want to be a part of God's family too. That looks like a pretty awesome thing, to be deeply, tightly connected with the God of this universe and with all the other people who trust him. That sounds like a pretty good world to be a part of. And this Abraham character, he doesn't have a long list of laws from God. He doesn't have a constitution to follow like the Ten Commandments. God just says, just listen to me. And when I tell you to do something, do it. And you don't have to worry about all the other things. Just the thing that I told you, just do that. And when I need you to do something else, I'll tell you about that too. And so Abraham ends up having this son named Isaac. And Isaac seemed to be the answer to the promise that God had made, that I'm going to bless your family, and then your family's going to get great big, and all the neighbors are going to notice how good the relationship is when your family with God, and everyone in the world will eventually get connected to me because of it. Isaac was the one through whom that was going to happen. And one day God says to him, hey, that kid, why don't you take him up a mountain and have a different kind of a worship service where the kid is the sacrifice? Now listen, any decent human being, any decent parent says, I clearly did not understand God on Thursday. Right? Any reasonable person goes, I mean, if you really want me to do that, you might be the wrong kind of God. Maybe I don't want this real tight relationship with you. Could we just have the blessings part? And I still get to do what I want. But Abraham, who loved this boy and saw him as the answer to his prayer and the promise of God. He loved that boy, but he also loved God and trusted him. And so he started out for the worship service, and he had some servants with him to bring some food and all of that stuff. And then at one point he just says, hey, you guys wait here, and the boy and I are going to go to the worship service. Don't worry, we'll be back. Don't worry, we will be back. And as he got up there and was ready to take the final act of obedience, saying, God, I don't know how you're going to pull this one off. God did. And he said, I needed you to prove it. You said you have faith, Abraham. I needed you to prove it. To you and to me. Here's the takeaway from the story. Teenagers, relax. The takeaway is not, Mom and Dad slit your throats this afternoon, okay? Trust me, they want to sometimes, but I'm not going to let them. Okay, they're not going to get by with saying, God told me, okay? Yeah. That's not the takeaway. The takeaway, I think, really isn't even about Abraham and Isaac. It's about you and me. And the takeaway is this. Sometimes God is going to look you in the eye and he says, you talk big. But you're going to have to prove that you really trust me. And you prove it by obeying what I have commanded you. You can bet on that day, God isn't lobbing a nice, easy, slow pitch in. He's bringing chin music, and he expects you to stand in the box and take it or swing for the fence and miss. But he is going to test us at some point, and we are going to have to prove to him and to us whether we actually trust him. Get this. Abraham went that day, and he learned by obeying God that God can be trusted. Period. He couldn't have learned it if he had held back in a lack of faith or in disobedience. Sometimes God asks us, you have faith. Now do something about it. So that I can see it, you can see it, and others can see it. Fourth picture is this. There's this prostitute. It's Family Sunday. We got a bunch of children in here with us. You know what prostitutes do and how they earn their living. There's no more desperate person than a woman who has to make her way in the world like that. And this particular prostitute was trapped in a city where everybody looked down on her for the kind of person that she was. But about half of them also went to her to have a little bit of fun and used her for pleasure. And they walked around town the rest of the week acting like they were superior to her. She was kind of looked at, Rahab was, as a garbage dump on wheels, or heels, maybe. Her deeds could never have earned her favor with God. What the lesson teaches us is that her deeds also could not separate her from the love of God, the grace of God, the acceptance of God. She didn't have a big old long faith story. She didn't have this dramatic testimony about how I was this horrible prostitute and I heard the plan of salvation and over the years my life has become... Nope, none of that. She just in one moment was woken up by God and recognized that he was present with his people. And the very next thing she did after recognizing that God and his people were there is she served somebody. And it gets her included by James as a person of great faith. He chose to use her as an example because she was going to hell for sure. But God woke her up, and the very next minute, she did something about her faith by taking care of other people. You know, if God asked me to write the book of Cliff to include in the Bible, I'd use a lot better illustrations than that. But he didn't, and it probably worked out for the best. So all I can do is summarize James's tough message this morning. A little chin music for you. Verses 14 through 17 just tell you, quite frankly, get off your rear end and help people, or quit saying that you're a disciple of Jesus, because you're not. You're just a fan, and he doesn't want any more of those. Verses 18 through 19 say that faith by itself is dead. Dead. Either dead now, or maybe it was dead all along, never really existed. That's the fastball that's coming in high and tight. He says, be more convincing than demons, or don't pretend that you believe because you don't. In the words of my good old dad, rest his soul, son, put up or shut up. Verses 20 through 24, he tells us, obey or stop talking like we will. Stop talking like we trust him if we won't obey, because we don't. And James tells us, that gods get to call the shots in the lives of their people. If we can't decide to start trusting him at least as well as a desperate hooker who woke up one day and served someone in the very next breath, then our faith's as dead as my good old dad. said this was chin music, but it's not really. You know what the difference is? Chin music is thrown by an opponent to try to get you to step back a little bit. James is serving the heat as an older brother who loves us. He's saying, step in closer. You can be closer to God than you are right now. Not by talking a whole bunch more about God and stuff, but by just submitting to Him in obedience. Worship team's coming. They're gonna play a song. You got communion elements earlier today. The whole point of this meal comes from the practice of making covenants. Covenants are different than contracts. Contracts are deals where if one person breaks the deal, the other person is let out of the deal. We studied that a little bit on Wednesday night together. This isn't a business lunch after you cut a deal. This is a covenant meal. Covenant is a very old style of relationship. It's the only kind of relationship by which God makes Himself available to people. And in a covenant relationship, there's a implication that I'll keep this for life even if it kills me. And if I don't, you have the right to kill me. That's a pretty serious relationship, huh? So understand that what you hold in your hands today is either the opportunity to accept that kind of relationship for the very first time, where you go in whole hog into relationship with God. Or maybe it's a way that you say, God, I've been presuming upon the relationship for a long time. And today I want to confess all of that. I've taken you far too lightly. I've been living toward you in ways that are a mockery, in ways that are disrespectful. I've made excuses instead of made a way closer to you. And today, I want to love you back in the way that you have loved me. On the night that He was betrayed, Jesus inaugurated that kind of relationship, and He said, "This bread is my body broken for you." And He invited everybody to take and eat it, but He said, if you eat this, remember me. Why don't you do this? Just sit with the Lord with this in your hand for a moment, would you? Listen to or sing the words of this song. And when you are ready, in faith and obedience to God, to drink His blood, it's that serious. When you're ready to respond to Him like that, you just do so.
I cast my mind to Calvary, where Jesus bled and died for me. I see His wounds, His hands, His feet, my Savior on that cursed tree. His body bound and drenched in tears, they laid Him down in Joseph's tomb, the entrance sealed by heavy stone. Messiah still and all alone. Oh, praise the The blazing sun shall pierce the night, and I will rise among the saints, my gaze transfixed on Jesus' face. Will you stand with us, please? Let's lift him up. His finished work on the cross, resurrected, alive, working in us. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord our God. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord our God. For endless days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord our God. Oh Lord
Yeah, give him some praise this morning. Listen, this business of following Jesus, it's tough. It's hard. And it's why James takes us to the gym, is so that we can be fit and strong and capable by the help of God to live in ways that make his love, his grace, and his mercy known and believable to everyone. The world doesn't need you to be perfect for you to be believable. But it needs you to be obedient by the power of the Holy Spirit and trusting enough in God that when you're imperfect, no excuses, you just run to him. You thank him for his grace and his mercy one more time. You let his love wash over you again and again. You'll be believable examples of God's love. You'll be the children of Isaac, the reason that everybody in the world wants a piece of the action of relationship with God. Go in relationship with him today. Obedient by the power of his Spirit, but anchored by his grace, his mercy, and his love.